Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we get into the sources behind the gear, the history, all the stuff that makes music tick.
Yeah.
And today, well, we're not hitting the usual suspects. Forget the Phase 90 for a minute. Forget the Dynacomp.
Mm-hmm.
We are going deep on a really fascinating, maybe slightly forgotten piece of gear history. It's the MXR M201 phaser.
Right.
Specifically, the big heavy one, the M201 from the Series 2000 era.
And our mission for you listening in is to go get past the standard MXR story pretty quickly. We want you to understand the context, the pressures of the early 80s that really made this design happen.
Okay.
So we're looking at sources covering the M201's like super robust build, its kind of surprising sound, which is all about those dual outputs and this weird contradiction about it being indestructible, even though they can be kind of fragile today.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This pedal was basically MXR trying to make a statement about quality to kind of future-proof themselves.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that. So some context first. The M201, it launched around, what, 82-ish?
Yeah, 1982 is the listed date.
And it wasn't just another pedal they threw out there. It was part of this whole Series 2000 line.
Exactly.
Which was like a full-on corporate push to tackle the idea that maybe some earlier MXR stuff wasn't, holding up.
Yeah.
They explicitly wanted something higher quality, tougher, a real successor to the older lines like Reference and the Command series.
And you've got to understand what MXR was facing back then, early 80s. You had the Japanese companies, Boss especially, just setting totally new standards for build quality, consistency.
Right, the indestructible Boss pedal.
Pretty much. And, digital effects were starting to appear on the horizon. So MXR couldn't just coast on the Phase 90's reputation. They needed a flagship analog line that just screamed, premium, high quality, reliable.
Okay.
The M201 was like a direct response to that pressure from competitors.
And you absolutely feel that pressure, that urgency to look high-end the second you pick one up. Let's talk about the physical design of this series, 2000 M201. The sources are really clear about the shift in build. It's this black metal housing, way different from some of the earlier plastic or Lexan shells they use for things like the old noise gate.
Oh, night and day.
Right.
Seriously.
Yeah.
If you're used to picking up a standard Phase 90, the M201 feels, well, the sources call the housing chunky.
Chunky, yeah.
Even indestructible. It's built like a tank. And that wasn't just for looks. It was meant to survive heavy touring, to fix the weaknesses some of the older enclosures definitely had. That move from the lighter stuff to this heavy die-cast box, that's really the defining feature of the whole Series 2000 line.
Yeah, it feels substantial. But despite that massive, tough chassis, the controls are classic MXR. Super simple, just two knobs. And let's not just define them, because I think most listeners get speed and region. But let's talk about how the M201 implements them. Is it different?
It feels a bit different, yeah. So the speed knob obviously controls the LFO rate, the sweet speed. But on the M201, people often say the usable range feels maybe a bit wider, more controlled than older models. You can get these really slow, almost like glacial sweeps, but they don't lose a definition.
Oh, okay.
And the region knob, the feedback control, that intensifies the effect. But the key thing here with the M201 is that even when you crank the regeneration, it doesn't just immediately fall apart into like unusable noise or self-oscillation.
Right. It stays musical.
Exactly. It stays musical, which suggests they definitely refined the circuitry compared to some of the older, maybe more unpredictable designs.
Okay. But hiding on that super robust box is a little sign of its time. And it's definitely a headache for people today, which kind of ties back to durability and compatibility stuff. We got to talk about the power jack.
Ah, yes. The power quirk.
Yeah.
It needs 9 volts, standard enough.
Yeah.
But the external power jack uses that old 3.5 millimeter, the 18-inch barrel connector, like an old headphone jack almost.
Yeah. It's a total giveaway for vintage collectors, but if you're trying to stick this on a modern pedal board, well, you need an adapter. Good luck finding one sometimes.
Definitely need an adapter.
So was that choice, that 3.5 millimeter jack back then, was that like a deliberate proprietary thing MXR did for Series 2000? Or was it just cheaper, like a holdover? Why stick with that when other companies, especially the ones MXR was trying to beat, were starting to use the standard barrel jacks we use now?
That's a really good question about like engineering priorities back then. Sources kind of suggest it was probably a holdover.
Okay.
And maybe an attempt to keep compatibility with specific power supplies MXR themselves were selling at the time. It's definitely not what you'd call future-proofing, is it?
Not at all.
It kind of highlights this weird disconnect. They make the case indestructible, this tank of a pedal.
Yeah.
But then they kind of cheaped out or at least compromised, on the power connection. It feels like a very 1980s way to solve a problem. Focus on the brute strength, maybe not so much the interoperability.
Okay, right. But this is where it gets really interesting. Moving past the box, the knobs, the slightly annoying power jack, because the M201 has this feature that just sets it miles apart from nearly all the MXR phasers that came before it, and it really shows what they were aiming for.
Yeah.
The dual outputs. We gotta talk about the dual outputs.
Yes, this is the core of why people call the M201 advanced. So what's really fascinating is the sources all confirm, yeah, it has two outputs.
Okay, stereo.
Well, not exactly standard stereo, like just splitting the signal left and right. They actually deliver, and the sources use this phrase, two separate outputs with different sounds.
Whoa, okay, different sounds. How different are we talking? Is it just like one's louder, or is the actual phasing different?
It's definitely the phasing itself, and this is the really crucial bit to understand. It's about the phase relationship between the outputs.
Okay.
So this design means the two outputs give you slightly different voicings, different tonal qualities. Think of it less like simple stereo panning, and more like having two complementary modulations happening at once. So one output might give you the sort of standard phase sweep you expect, while the second output might provide a version that's maybe frequency shifted slightly, or even has its phase angle kind of inverted relative to the first one.
So you're getting two distinct textures at the same time? That completely changes the game sonically.
Totally.
And that explains why users describe the M201 as more advanced or richer sounding than the classics. You know, you take a Phase 90, you get that chewy kind of vocal focus swirl. It's iconic, obviously.
Right, it is.
But the M201, because of this dual output thing, it sounds like it offers something much wider, almost shimmery.
Yeah, shimmery is a good word. And if you think about that in terms of creative sound design, especially back then, that flexibility was pretty revolutionary for a pedal.
Okay.
It let players, maybe more so in the studio, blend those two phasing textures together in parallel. You could run them to two different amps or two channels on a mixing desk.
Right, get a huge soundscape.
Exactly. Or you could even use that, say, inverse sounding output to cancel out certain frequencies when you blend them back together. Allows for a deeper, more complex swirl, but without washing out your original dry guitar tone underneath.
Wow.
It was pretty sophisticated signal control that just wasn't really there in the simpler, older MXR phasers. The M201 feels like it was built for players wanting more subtlety, maybe, and that big stereo image potential.
Okay, so we've got this really sophisticated pedal, supposedly indestructible from the early to mid-'80s. It's designed to, like, conquer the market with quality and this cool, flexible sound.
Yeah.
And yet, it didn't really grab the market share like the simpler stuff did it? Like the Phase 90 just kept selling. Was the M201 maybe too complex for the average player back then?
That's a really valid point, actually. It's a good counter-argument. The market, especially the pedal market, often goes for simplicity and ease of use over technical complexity.
Right.
The M201, well, it needed more cables, maybe 2 amps to get the full effect, and it definitely cost more than the single output classics. So while it might have been a technical success, its sort of market failure suggests maybe the average player at the time was just happy with less complexity, maybe didn't need or want those extra features, so it remains kind of an outlier.
Which naturally leads us right into its status today as a collector's item.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about its current state, because M201 phasers, they're pretty rare out there in the vintage world now. You don't see them pop up constantly.
No, not common at all.
And the irony is just, it's right there, despite being marketed as this indestructible beast. The ones that have survived often show very specific kinds of wear and tear. Kind of proves that marketing slogans don't always match up with reality 40 years down the line. And what's so telling about that wear is how often sources point to one particular weak spot.
The battery door.
Yeah.
The battery door. Yeah. While the big metal box itself is usually fine, you see tons of reports of cosmetic dings, sure, but specifically non-functional battery door latches, like constantly.
Okay.
There's even this one specific anecdote from a listing we saw where the seller just flat out said, yeah, the locking tab's broken. It's held shut with gaffer tape.
That's such a perfectly human detail for a piece of gear that was meant to be this, unkillable tank.
Right.
The metal box could survive anything, but the tiny little plastic latch just gives up.
It really points to a classic design oversight, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The most complex moving part, the little latch mechanism, clearly wasn't engineered to the same crazy, robust standard as the main closure.
Yeah.
It's like the Achilles heel of that whole Series 2000 indestructible story.
And because this pedal is let's face it, less documented than something like a Phase 90 where every variation is known. Original internals become absolutely crucial for collectors trying to figure out the value. It's not like you can just look up the schematic easily. So lots of listings really emphasize original internals or unmodified. That's a big plus factor, precisely because collectors want to be sure they're getting that specific intended dual-voiced sound that really defined this Series 2000 phaser. And just for collectors listening, the sources are pretty clear. The standard finish for the M201 is that black metal. We didn't find any credible documentation supporting claims of like different color variants or plastic housing versions for this specific M201 model.
Okay, looking for that black heavy 2-knob box with the 2 output jacks. That's the one.
Okay, so summing this all up, what does this mean for the M201's legacy? It really stands as MXR's big, serious attempt in the 80s to craft this higher quality, supposedly indestructible successor to their earlier hits.
Yeah.
It definitely delivered, technically speaking, with a lot of sonic flexibility thanks to those cool dual voicing outputs. You got a richer, wider phaser sound that was way more complex than a Phase 90.
And yet, despite all that technical cleverness, it remains pretty rare, kind of undocumented today. Maybe it was just overlooked in the rush for simpler, cheaper effects back then.
Which leaves us with a really interesting question, I think, for anyone interested in gear history or design.
Yeah.
Given that we know the Series 2000 line was intended to be the peak of robust, high-quality analog design for MXR, how does the fact that the M201 consistently shows up on the vintage market with these common, albeit minor physical failures, like that darn battery door latch,
Right, the latch.
how does that complicate the story of its supposed indestructibility? You know, did MXR maybe focus too much on making the main shell tough and overlook the smaller functional bits? It's definitely something to think about when you're looking at ambitious vintage marketing claims versus the actual reality of how gear survives or doesn't 4 decades later. Maybe the M201 was this amazing sonic achievement, ultimately let down by a tiny, fragile piece of plastic.